I once met a little girl who discovered the biggest bug in the world. There is no law in the world that prohibits killing. There is the crime of intentional homicide, which can be punished by death. But this is a punishment clause. In other words, you can kill as long as you can bear the punishment of a life for a life. I was amazed. And the reason she came up with this crooked theory was heartbreaking. In the office, I was setting up the scene to make it look like Principal Douglas had hanged himself. But then I suddenly noticed a slight noise in the bathroom. I went over and pushed the door open, and then I saw a little girl in a school uniform, but her clothes were messy and her hair was disheveled. I looked back at Principal Douglas, who was still dangling from the ceiling. Good riddance. This was a vocational high school. This 50-year-old Principal Douglas, whom I had hanged, had done all kinds of evil things. The client had even printed out a list of them. I carefully placed the stack of documents at the foot of Principal Douglas. The client had also thoughtfully forged a suicide note, which probably said that he had done so many bad things, and now he had ended his own life. Chile blah blah. I methodically dealt with the scene, removing all traces of my presence. In the end, it was the little girl hiding in the bathroom who gave me a headache. I couldn't kill her. First of all, we had no grudge, even though she had seen my face. Secondly, killing her would affect the arrangement of the whole case, and all my previous efforts would be in vain. She had been hiding in the bathroom, afraid to come out. I leaned against the door and thought for a long time before asking her, "What's your name?" "Why in Principal Douglas' office?" The girl raised her head slightly and peeked at me through her messy hair, then immediately lowered her head and said, My name is Arena. Principal Douglas. He asked me to come. He often asks me to come. No, and I'm asking why. How can he threaten you? Or are you just stupid? Elena's voice was even weaker. He wants to expel me. If I get expelled, then my parents still kill me. I was speechless. At that moment I couldn't tell if she was stupid, or I was stupid. From her campus card, I could see that she was already a third-year student. How could she still be like a child, afraid of her parents? And because of such a reason, she let that beast. And often, I just found it unbelievable. Later, I learned that there was a reason, but it was also because of her simple mind that I suddenly had a win-win idea. I let her get dressed and come out of the bathroom. It wasn't until she stood up that I realized how skinny a girl could be. Really, her thighs were thinner than my arms, and she was only about 1.5 meters tall. She looked like a child. She must have been malnourished for a long time, right? Poor thing. But I didn't have time to pity her. I didn't have much time. Seeing how weak she was, I figured I could threaten her. So I started off by being tough. "Listen, if you tell anyone you've seen me, I'll kill your whole family. Do you understand?" But at that moment, Elena, who had been trembling and silent, suddenly turned to look at me. Her eyes were actually shining. She spoke as if she had seen hope. Really? Uncle, can you really kill my whole family?" Her tone was very wrong. I glanced at her. What was with that hopeful little expression? "No, I'm threatening you." "Wait, you want your family dead?" Elena nodded, then lowered her head again. Now, it was my turn to be puzzled. "Why?" Elena lowered her head again, and dared not answer. Maybe she had just blurted out what she really wanted me to do, kill her whole family. Thinking that she was very afraid of her parents, I asked again, Are your parents bad to you? She nodded again, her head hanging low, and whispered, "Bad. They beat me, scold me, and what Principal Douglas do that to me?" It dawned on me. I suddenly understood why she was so thin. I also understood why she would be threatened by that beastly old principal. So that was it. I sighed and asked, "Your dad?" "Yes. And my brother. He also. My mother doesn't care. Because I'm adopted." I knew that Western society also had similar family problems, and I also knew about a vicious phenomenon here. That is treating girls as fertility tools to have a son. I thought about it calmly for a moment, and finally decided to leave it alone. Because I was just doing a job for the money, and there was no profit in this. "Uncle, can you help me kill my family? I will repay you." "No, you have to do your own thing." "But I don't dare. I definitely can't beat them. They will still torture me." "How do you know you can't beat them if you don't try to resist? You just want to kill people. Do you know what it means to abide by the law?" Although I wanted to laugh when I said that I abided by the law, I held back. And she was too. I was thinking about how to handle this flawlessly. But then I heard a fury I had never heard before. Elena blurted out again, "But the law doesn't prohibit killing." I asked impatiently, "What do you mean?" "No. Have you read the criminal code?" "I've studied it. The criminal code is a punishment clause. There is no prohibition of killing, only the crime of intentional homicide. The maximum penalty is the death penalty. In other words, the law does not prohibit killing. You can kill, but you have to accept pay with your life. That's all." At that moment, I was shocked. What kind of brain circuit did it take to come up with such a theory? She even said it so fluently. This was not a crooked theory that a weak girl could come up with. I suddenly understood why she wasn't afraid of me at all. I asked cautiously, "Elena, are you ready to die?" She nodded. As expected, only those who were resigned to death would think of such a crooked theory. Weak theory. Because she had nothing more to fear. If she had the ability, I believe she would break through the predicament by dying. She was already that desperate. Just as I was seriously considering whether to help her, tragedy struck. Bang! The office door was suddenly kicked open. I was startled and instinctively pulled Elena over. Looking towards the door, I found that it was actually a policeman in uniform. Why? I had entered the school disguised as a maintenance worker, and hadn't shown my hand at all. I had also made sure that there were no surveillance devices in Principal Douglas' office. He even brought Elena here to do such dirty things. So how could he install surveillance cameras? So how could there be a policeman bursting in directly? More importantly, before I could even explain myself, the policeman had already raised his gun. At that moment, my heart sank. I had been betrayed. Either the client betrayed me, or my boss betrayed me. No matter which one it was, their purpose was obvious. They wanted me dead. Because I saw that the policeman who raised his gun obviously didn't want to say anything. I wanted to respond, but it was too late. Pulling Elena in front of me was the most ridiculous mistake I made on reflex. It made me a vicious gangster holding hostages, further increasing the need to shoot. Bang! A bullet flew towards the center of my eyebrows, and at that moment, my eyes went completely white. Ew. I don't know how long it took, but I woke up. But I found myself in the hospital, and it was a single room, and most importantly, I wasn't handcuffed yet. Although I didn't understand why I was shot, but not dead, the first thing I thought of when I woke up was to run. Unfortunately, before I could get out of bed, the door slowly opened. and the person who walked in was a nurse. I stared at her warily, but she walked towards me quickly and said, happily, "Elena, you're finally awake. Don't rush to get out of bed." I froze, and then noticed my hands and feet, my body. It was as thin as a rake. Ignoring what the nurse said to me, I rushed into the bathroom next door. Then, in the mirror, I saw a face that was unfamiliar, yet familiar. Elena. I was fucking trapped in Elena's body. I spent the whole night coming to terms with this unbelievable thing. I racked my brains, but couldn't figure out why. But years of experience told me that I had to accept this first, and then think of a solution. Not a single policeman came over that night. I asked the nurse, and she said that when the school leaders sent me over, there were policemen who came along, but it seemed that everything had been taken care of. She also said that because the incident happened at school, all news would be blocked, and she didn't know the details either. She told me to rest well and said I would be discharged soon. I wanted to be discharged too, because I had to figure out two things. First, how did I get into Elena's body? Second, who betrayed me? But then, the problem arose. I couldn't contact anyone I knew before. First of all, the real me was definitely dead. Secondly, no one would believe that I was actually in a little girl's body. Furthermore, for some unknown reason, I was trapped in Elena's body, which caused me to lose some of my original memories. Acting rashly would only make me look like a lunatic. And there was another question. How did Elena survive? How could the people who were in charge of cleaning up the mess in Principal Douglas' office, including dealing with my body, let Elena go so easily? I could only think of one possibility, that the policeman who shot me was a real policeman. But he was a dirty cop. And I was shot dead because I killed Principal Douglas and held Elena hostage, and Elena was sent to the hospital as a survivor. If that was the case, then Elena should be safe. After thinking about it, I had no choice but to wait and see. It wasn't long before a fat man with a full beard came to the hospital with a sullen face to pick me up. I knew he was Dad. I thought of Elena in my impression and pretended to be silent. The fat man didn't doubt me, and so I went back home. It was a nice-looking two-story detached house. Although it was located in the suburbs of Greentown, it also showed that her family was not poor. Elena's father told me that the school wanted me to rest at home until the end of the weekend and return to school next week. That was normal, considering such a big thing had happened. I originally thought that a girl who had been through such a big event should be cared for and loved when she got home. However, not only was there no such thing, but something even more disgusting happened. It was already midnight when we got home, so I didn't see Mom and Brother. I went back to my room very quickly and didn't want to do anything but lie down, because I had a terrible headache. I couldn't figure out what was going on at all. Just like that, half asleep and half awake, it was midnight. Something terrible happened. The door was quietly opened. Because I had been lying in the hospital for a whole day, I wasn't too sleepy. The slight sound of the door opening woke me up. I knew that the person who came in must be Elena's so-called dad. He didn't realize that Elena's body had been taken over by another soul, so he wanted to continue to violate her as usual. But he was out of luck. I was a killer. I listened to his footsteps and judged his position when he reached the bed. I jumped out of bed. I aimed at his jaw, ready to punch. But things turned out to be beyond my expectation. Before my fist could hit him, a big rough hand had already pressed on my face, not only sealing my mouth, but also slamming me back onto the pillow. My head spun. How could he be so strong? No, I suddenly reacted. It was Iana's body that was too weak and had no strength. I was still thinking of resisting, but I found that my body couldn't help but tremble. A sense of fear struck me, a kind of fear that gushed from my heart and enveloped me, making me completely unable to move. This feeling was truly desperate. Even though I had been a killer for many years, had made many enemies, and had been hunted and assassinated many times. Even though I had been on the verge of life and death so many times. No, not even when the bullet went through my eyebrows did I feel such despair. And this dad seemed very unhappy with me getting out of bed. His big hand, which was covering my mouth, directly grabbed my face and lifted my whole head up, then slammed it back down on the pillow, lifting it up again, slamming it back down on the pillow. After repeating this several times, I finally couldn't take it anymore and slowly lost consciousness. And the last picture was of his filthy body pressing down on me. When I woke up, it was already dawn. My head was pounding and I felt uncomfortable all over. Thinking back on what happened last night, I was still afraid. I didn't expect that I would be so easily defeated. I realized a problem. He and Elena were not on the same level at all, and it was impossible to fight him head-on with Elena's body. And he was obviously very experienced. He didn't leave any marks on Elena's body, but made me completely lose the ability to resist. I suddenly realized a very serious problem. In the past, when I saw domestic violence incidents in the news, I would sneer and think that one of the reasons was that the victims did not resist, because it would indirectly condone the occurrence of domestic violence. But now I realized how naive that idea was. Even a seasoned killer like me, who had stepped on dozens or even hundreds of corpses, was helpless. Especially that sense of despair. It was simply impossible to fight against it with one's own willpower. Too terrifying. But at that time, I had a strange thought. I was wondering if it was because Elena was too cowardly to complain to anyone about the violence of this beastly father. For example, to the mother figure. No matter what, she was still the wife of this beast. She wouldn't turn a blind eye to such a filthy thing, right? But the next moment, my thought was completely dispelled, because the door was suddenly pushed open, and a mean-looking woman rushed in. Before I could react, she slapped me across the face. My whole head was knocked askew, and half of my face felt like it was on fire. Then, I heard her shouting in my ears, "You little bitch! You're up already and haven't made breakfast yet. How lazy can you be? Why didn't you just die yesterday?" Elena's body began to tremble again. I suddenly felt very, very sorry for this little girl. I actually told her, "How do you know you can't beat them if you don't try to resist?" It was simply easier said than done. "You little brat. Are you mute? Can't you hear me telling you to go out and make breakfast?" Cry, cry, cry. All you do is cry every day. Cry your fucking eyes out. You're just a piece of trash, you know that. If you don't come out and make breakfast in 10 minutes, I'll beat you to death. After the door was slammed, shut with a bang, I came back to my senses. Elena's eyes were streaming with tears. There was simply no room for communication. In this case, even if I said something, she would blame Elena, not that beast. I shook my head vigorously, trying to make myself more awake. When my eyes swept to the corner, in my blurry vision, I seemed to see a thin figure. Was it Elena? Yes. It was her, curled up in the corner. I saw her hugging her knees, her shoulders shaking. I heard her crying and muttering. In my next life, can I live in an ordinary family without a mother who slaps me in the face at every turn? Without so many bad things. That way I can live a good life, right? She did follow the victims. I wiped my tears, and the phantom disappeared. Perhaps it was not a phantom. I knew I had to do something. I might suddenly leave Elena's body at any time, and the best I could leave her was the promise I hadn't been able to keep. Kill her whole family. I spent a total of 4 days at Elena's house. 4 days of living a life worse than death, let alone her abusive parents. I couldn't even resist her fat, greasy brother, Barney. He was only in the second year of junior high school, but he was already almost 170 meters tall, a head taller than Elena, who was only 15 meters tall. And he was incredibly fat. He must have weighed at least 850 kilograms. Fortunately, they all had to go to work and school during the day, so I could get some rest. But those 4 days were still harder than the past 30 years of my life. So on Sunday night, I rushed to St. Mary's Vocational High School, where Elena went to school. Before entering the school, I wandered around the neighborhood and bought some supplies. My goal was clear. I wanted to hide in the school and spend a week getting enough tools to kill Elena's whole family. Then on Friday night, I would go back to that disgusting home and let them die the death they deserved. When I entered the school, I chatted with Uncle Benjamin, the security guard. Then I learned that Principal Douglas's death had been covered up very well. The security guards only knew that he committed suicide. There was even no news about the policeman shooting me or Elena being there. The people behind this really had their hands in everything. This further showed that I couldn't be rash. It was better to deal with Elena's whole family first, because I had no memory of Elena at all. Even going back to the dormitory was a big problem. Fortunately, I got Elena's phone, and I just needed her fingerprint to unlock it. I found a name in her social software called Catherine and sent her a message. I explained that I had been in the hospital for 2 days and had temporarily lost my memory. I didn't know which dormitory I was in and asked her to come out and pick me up. After waiting for a long time, she came to the school gate. She was a rebellious girl with heavy makeup. As soon as she saw me, she actually traded over and asked with concern, "Elena, are you okay? Why were you hospitalized? You really lost your memory?" It seemed she was Elena's friend. I could only answer weakly, "Yes, I lost my memory. So I don't know how I got to the hospital. Let's go back to the dormitory first." "Wait," Catherine frowned and asked with some worry, "You really don't remember how the other 4 people in the dormitory treated you? Let alone the other 4 roommates?" Before Catherine said it, I thought that boarding schools were all 4-person rooms. I didn't expect that this broken vocational high school actually had 6 people in a room. Seeing my confused expression, Catherine hurriedly suggested, "Elena, I think I better tell you first." Then I understood. It was bullying. With Catherine's explanation, I finally understood. Elena was a servant in the dormitory. In addition to cleaning, packing meals and other chores every day, she also had to hand wash clothes for 5 of them. Even dirty underwear, smelly socks, smelly shoes. If they were slightly unhappy with her, she would be collectively boycotted and even subjected to violence. It was simply too much. The other 4 people in the dormitory formed a clique. Only Catherine was Elena's friend. Only she would help Elena. Their clothes have been piled up for several days. They're all complaining that you went home, so you have to be mentally prepared. They may try to punish you, prank you. But don't worry, I will explain it to them. You just don't resist because You can't resist them. Listening to Catherine's words, I nodded slightly. Then I asked her, "Do you know what happened to me in the hospital besides losing my memory?" Catherine shook her head. The doctor said that I may have suffered a lot of mental stimulation and developed mental illness, such as schizophrenia. The diagnosis will be mailed to the school in a few days. Catherine's eyes seemed a little confused. She didn't know what I meant by saying these words. After all, she was still young. It was normal not to understand. So I bluntly explained what I meant. I mean, I won't be punished for killing people now. Catherine was obviously taken aback. Before she could react, I took her little hand and said happily, Let's go upstairs." Elena's dormitory was in 308. He arrived quickly. The dark wooden door was open, a crack. It wasn't completely closed, and naturally, it wasn't locked. I stood at the door and paused for a moment. Catherine was still behind me, comforting me. "Don't be afraid. Let's go in and meet everyone." I smiled and turned to her and asked, "You're my good friend, right?" Catherine nodded. "Good then. After you." I grabbed Catherine's hand and used all my strength to swing it forward, pushing her whole body towards the door. She stumbled and knocked the door open, and immediately let out a scream. Because a wash basin fell precisely on her head, and the liquid inside splashed most of her body. The water in the basin. No, I smelled a urine smell. Catherine fell to the ground, struggling to shake off the urine on her head, and yelled at me hysterically. Damn it. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." The other 4 people stood not far away, dumbfounded. Maybe none of them expected things to turn out like this. I chuckled. From the beginning, I knew this Catherine was not right. How could there be a friend of a bullied person in the same dormitory? A bullied person had no friends. Because if anyone dared to be friends with her, then that friend would be isolated and bullied in the same way. This was the cruelest and most terrifying thing about school. So maybe this Catherine was the mastermind behind Elena's bullying. She was just coaxing me upstairs, waiting for a good show. I walked into the dormitory, closed the door, and locked it. Then I took out a fruit knife from my backpack. This was the supplies I bought outside the school. I walked over, showing what I thought was a creepy smile, and said to them, "I said I was mentally ill and wouldn't be punished for killing people. Don't you believe me?" After saying that, I grinned and rushed towards Catherine, who was covered in urine. Don't come over here." But she was completely soaked in urine and collapsed on the floor. She had no chance to escape. I pulled up a part of her hair that wasn't wet and pulled her whole head back. Her neck was completely exposed, and the fruit knife in my other hand was also raised. Of course, I paused. The other 4 people were so scared that none of them dared to come forward. Catherine was so scared that her mouth was wide open, and she cried, forgetting even to call for help. And the urine on her face flowed into her mouth. This picture was really beautiful. Of course, I didn't cut her throat. There was no need. According to the Anna law, you can kill as long as you are prepared to pay for it with your life. If I killed her, I would also suffer the consequences, and I didn't want to die with this trash. So my fruit knife swung down fiercely, but only cut off the hair I was pulling. Catherine's head jerked forward, and then she quickly backed away, crying and running. To deal with the bullying of these 17 or 18-year-old brats, don't use your brain. You'll lose if you do. Don't play those fancy tricks, schemes, or whatever. They're useless. As for love, education, and influence, go to hell. The best way was to make them afraid simply and rudely. At that moment, the only sound in the entire dormitory was Catherine's crying. I picked up my backpack, walked to the bed closest to the door, and threw it on the bed. The 6-person dormitory was very small, with 3 bunk beds in the hall and a balcony and bathroom at the back. I sat on the bed and began to speak slowly. First, this bed is mine. Second, if anyone talks about what happened tonight, I'll kill them for real. If the news gets out, and I don't know who said it, I'll kill all of you. Third, whoever paid, clean it up. Now. Catherine cried and crawled into the bathroom. As for the other 4, they trembled and began to move. I lay on the bed, not caring whose bed it was. They wouldn't object, because I had been holding the knife in my hand. I didn't realize until I got up the next day that they had all run away. It was within my expectations, because what I wanted to do really required privacy. In order to concentrate on doing this well, I even turned off Elena's phone. I didn't need anyone who knew Elena before to contact me. One more person meant one more risk. Instead of going to class, I huddled in the dorm and drew a floor plan of Elena's house. I marked the windows, electrical wiring, pipes, and sockets that I observed. Obviously, I was considering which way to make them die tragically was the most appropriate. It had to be satisfying, but I couldn't get Elena involved. Until the afternoon. There was a physical education class in the afternoon, and I had to go. Because the physical education teacher was a middle-aged man named Arthur, who was also the director of the school's sports program. I had seen his name in the information on Principal Douglas that the client gave me, and I knew that they had colluded to embezzle millions from the school's new gymnasium project. As for why Arthur hadn't been arrested yet, I guessed it was because of the dirty cop who killed me. He must have taken the dirty money, and he must have had a purpose, such as destroying Principal Douglas's suicide note. Therefore, Arthur was a very important link for me. He couldn't be my client, because Principal Douglas's suicide note clearly stated his own crimes. But he had not been investigated for corruption, which was very intriguing. In the afternoon, P class. It was an ordinary P class, but I found that a classmate kept looking at me. He was tall and thin, with short hair and black rimmed glasses, looking silly. Strangely enough, he seemed to have some kind of privilege. He was always sitting in the shade of a tree to rest, and never lined up with us at all. He would peek at me from time to time, his eyes full of melancholy, and I didn't even look at him. Although it was a bit strange, at that time my mind was all on killing Elena's whole family, so I didn't pay attention to such a seemingly insignificant person. But then I found out that he was not insignificant. Soon, Arthur announced free time. I was just thinking about how to get close to him when he actually took the initiative to send someone to tell me to go to his office. I happily went to the appointment and came to his private office. Before I could say anything, I saw a scene that made my jaw drop. Arthur hurriedly closed the door, and then he actually started to unbuckle his belt. He also said, "Take off your pants." I was dumbfounded. Was the whole world bullying Elena? But then I thought about it. He was a scum who colluded with Principal Douglas, so it made sense that he was also a beast. However, I couldn't help but ask him, "Wait, Director Arthur, don't you know how Principal Douglas died?" His hand, which was unbuttoning his pants, suddenly stopped. I guessed that he knew how Principal Douglas died. He was just betting that I didn't. Why would he act like nothing had happened, and would rather take off his pants than find out if Elena, who was in Principal Douglas's office that day, knew anything? The answer might be that he thought he had everything under control. At this time, Arthur looked up at me and said, "I almost forgot. You were at his place that day. You must have been scared by Principal Douglas's suicide. Be good, only I will love you from now on." I quickly said, "No, haven't you considered this contradiction? For example, if Principal Douglas committed suicide, then why would he call me over?" He stopped all his movements. After a while, he slowly pulled out his belt, pulled it out completely into a weaponized state. This action of his confirmed a certain assumption in my heart. I assumed that, although Arthur was not my client, he was the client of that dirty cop. He knew that my client was going to kill Principal Douglas and expose all their scandals, so he sent someone to stop it in time. That's why he was so calm to continue teaching, because he knew that everything had been taken care of. But Elena was an exception to this whole thing. No one expected Elena to appear in Principal Douglas's office, not even me, a killer. The dirty cop, sent by Arthur, certainly didn't expect it either. However, Elena was not part of his mission at all, so he naturally would not get involved in this mess. Maybe he made up an excuse and fooled Arthur. That's why nothing happened to Elena, and even the police didn't pay attention to her. And Arthur also thought that Eleanor really didn't know anything. I smiled. This bargaining chip, if used well, could even achieve the effect of killing two birds with one stone. First, it would help me get the supplies I wanted to kill Eleanor's whole family. Second, it would be to find out who betrayed me through his source of information. That is, how he knew that I was assassinating Principal Douglas that day. But right now, he wasn't my bargaining chip yet. I had to take care of this step first. "Director, Arthur, do you think I don't know anything?" I said seriously, but actually, I saw some interesting things, such as about the gymnasium, about a lot of money. His face darkened. In order to prevent him from getting angry and rushing up to kill me, I immediately said the next words. "Principal Douglas's information mentioned you more than once, and it mentioned more than just the gymnasium, but also various evidence of contact with you. I have taken pictures and uploaded them to the cloud disk. As soon as I die, my friends will release them all. Although it was all fake, my years of walking on a tightrope allowed me to speak convincingly even when I was lying." Arthur frowned, staring at me fiercely for a long time. Then he asked such a sentence. You're not Elena. Who the hell are you?" Obviously, my performance just now was completely different from Elena's usual submissive and obedient self. He had completely felt that I was a completely different person. But of course, I didn't answer that question either. I only said what I wanted to say. "If you don't want to spend the rest of your life in jail, then you have to do me a favor." I didn't ask him anything about the killer me, because I was afraid that I would scare the snake away if I was too anxious. One thing at a time. If he could agree to do me some small favors, then maybe he could continue to do the big ones later. "Who the hell are you?" "No, you are you?" "A monster." Arthur was actually scared. "Good. Don't worry. I won't hurt you. I still need you to do me a favor." I looked at him and gave him a big smile. But maybe I wasn't very good at controlling Elena's facial expressions, so my smile was a bit exaggerated and stiff. Because Arthur seemed even more terrified. When I came out of the administration building, the sun was still shining brightly outside. I gave Arthur 3 days to get me the supplies I needed. Because some of them were contraband, some were controlled drugs. It was really difficult to get them. The plan was to get all the supplies on Thursday and go to Elena's house early on Friday morning. At that time, Both parents went to work, and Barney, the younger brother, went to school. The house was empty, which was a good time to set up the scene. Then when they got home on Friday night, we could have some real fun. On the way back to the dormitory, building with a brisk pace, I ran into that boy again. Tall and thin with short hair and black, rimmed glasses, looking silly. I didn't even know his name, and didn't want to talk to him at all. But he still stopped me. "Yena, you... wait for me. I have something to tell you." I still ignored him, didn't even stop, and went straight back to the dormitory. The dormitory was empty. Catherine and the others should have taken the opportunity to take their belongings. I was still buried in the desk, continued to study Elena's house, devise a plan for Elena to get her revenge. No, not just that. I also wanted revenge for myself. In the 4 days at her house, the Indian and abuse I suffered, I must return it. These 2 days, I found some suspicious people around me. I still didn't go to class, only went out during meal times. Even so, I still found 2 strangers in security uniforms appearing on the edge of my vision several times. Before I assassinated Principal Douglas, I had figured out the entire security system of the school, and I knew every security guard. But not these 2. So they were Arthur's men. He wanted to kill me, but he was also afraid that I really had evidence in my hands, and that I really had friends who would expose the evidence after I died. So he must have sent people to watch me. Therefore, I thought about it, and decided to change the plan for Friday, and include Arthur in it. And Thursday soon arrived. I went to his private office, as scheduled, and even locked the door behind me. He sat behind his large desk, his expression grave. I hadn't seen those 2 suspicious security guards along the way, which was very suspicious. I looked at him without speaking. He pointed to a suitcase on the floor and said, "It's all in there, but before you take it, answer me one question." I smiled and immediately answered, "I am Elena, and the answer is still the same, if you ask again." He was obviously taken aback. "Besides, there are people hiding there, right?" I pointed to the bathroom next to me. The door was closed, and the last time I came, the door was open. There must be at least those 2 security guards who had been watching me secretly. His eyes widened. I was still smiling, and asked back, "I don't want much, but you prepared a whole suitcase, so I guess if you let me ask something, this suitcase would be for me, right?" Fear reappeared in his eyes, exactly the same as last time. I continued to speak slowly. "It doesn't matter who I am, but your status, your money, is the most important thing, isn't it? Your people must have found out these days that I have no friends. Otherwise you wouldn't be thinking about killing me now. But have you ever thought about the possibility that I have a family?" Arthur frowned again. He glanced at the suitcase, then looked at me and asked back, "Your family, those things, aren't they for use on your family?" He knew a lot, but this was also good. It saved me from explaining so much to him. I could directly put forward this condition. "Yes, in view of your doubts about me, I don't believe you now either. So tomorrow night, you will come to my house." Arthur shook his head slightly and refused. "Impossible." I explained to him, very briefly. "You must come. This is a win-win situation. You are afraid of me, and I am even more afraid of you. So we must be tied to the same boat. Don't you want to catch me red-handed? That is my leverage for murder." He was silent. I went over and pushed the suitcase, turned around, and walked out the door. I knew he would agree. Because he had blood on his hands, he was not afraid. He was just weighing the pros and cons. and in the end, he would think to kill me tomorrow night. So tomorrow night, it would definitely be a grand carnival. Early Friday morning, I returned to Nana's house. Sure enough, they were all out. I happily set about my work. Since I had decided on a carnival, the most important thing, of course, was to have fun. When you're having fun, you can be a little loud. Although you're in the suburbs, you can't be too loud. So the sound insulation had to be good. I installed soundproof cotton on the windows of 2 of the rooms on the first floor and welded them shut. I smashed the door locks and installed a metal latch on the outside. Moreover, the room had wooden floors, which was exactly what I wanted. With expansion screws, I could fix the chairs firmly to the floor. They couldn't be pulled out at all. There was only 1 chair in one room, while there were 3 chairs in the other room arranged in a pin shape. Of course, there was also the most important part. Eerie and the smart atomizer were a perfect match. The enclosed compartment prevented it from evaporating easily, and the wide-angle atomizer nozzle made it more lethal. I put the atomizer on the shoe rack by the door. After several adjustments, I made sure that the spray nozzle could spray directly at the faces of the people entering the door. It was smart and could be remotely started with a mobile phone, which was very convenient. Just as I was finishing everything, I suddenly received a message on my phone. If your dad knew what you were going to do, would you die there? My heart skipped a beat. This message was sent by Arthur. Was he trying to play tricks? And just at this time, there was the sound of the door opening outside. I quickly hid. Judging from the voices of the 2 people talking, it was Elena's mother, who came back with Barney, the silly son. The moment the door opened, I used my phone to start the atomizer at the door. However, to my surprise, their conversation went like this. Well, what is this smoky thing? It stinks. Let me see. It really stinks, this. This is a humidifier or something, right? We have this thing in our house, and it's still on. Maybe your dad did it. Wasn't he messing with some essential oils recently? Maybe he forgot to turn it off when he left. Press this to turn it off. See, it's fine. Then they happily entered the house. I immediately ran to the stairs and went up to the 2nd floor. And the mother and son, they were perfectly fine. Was the Jaeger useless? No. I thought of Arthur's message. Damn it, he played me. Of all the supplies, I asked him to prepare if it was the only one that could not be thoroughly tested. I couldn't just inhale some of it to test it, could I? Arthur's actions completely disrupted my plan. I didn't even know what to do next. I quickly replied to Arthur. You actually gave me fake heather. Those 2 inhaled a lot, but nothing happened. Do you want to die? I can make the evidence that will ruin your reputation public immediately, believe it or not. His message came back quickly. I believe you can, but you won't, because I've gone over with your dad. I can help you do what you want to do, but whatever you want to do, I have to be in control. Damn. Arthur, as expected, would not be at my mercy. My intimidation no longer worked. He was going all out, because he also knew that if he obediently submitted to me this time, he would have to submit to me every time after that. I had a bad feeling that I might die here. As time passed by, I could only hide in the room on the 2nd floor, waiting quietly. About 20 minutes later, the door was pushed open. Elena's dad was pushed in. He stumbled and almost fell. Behind him, followed by 3 people, Arthur and the 2 security guards. They were dressed very inconspicuously and wore hats presumably to conceal their faces as much as possible. Presumably they had done their best to hide their tracks, and even if something happened here, no one would know they had been here. The atomizer on the shoe rack at the door was activated again, and the smelly gas sprayed out. One security guard asked, "It stinks, Mr. Decor." "Arthur, is this gas okay?" Arthur smiled and said, "Fake. I found a solution with a similar smell, non-toxic and harmless." The other security guard directly kicked his dad and shouted, "What are you doing? Move." Elena's dad, who was so violent in front of Elena, was now like a weak chicken too, scared to say a word. Sure enough, only those who bullied the weak and feared the strong would bully their families. Then they pushed aside the thick fog and walked into the living room. Then they found out his mother and silly son Bonnie were tied to dining chairs, and I finally made my grand entrance. I was holding my phone. The screen of the phone was showing the surveillance video from the entrance, and I was also wearing a gas mask. Through it my voice seemed a little rougher. "Aha, surprise, surprise, surprise." His dad was dumbfounded, and Arthur subconsciously covered his mouth and asked her, "Could it be that this is?" I chuckled and answered, "That's right, real Arthur. You thought only you could get it. If I didn't pretend to be fooled, how could you have walked into my trap so obediently?" When they came in, they didn't even turn off the atomizer, so the ether mist continued to drift, even into the living room. His dad was the first to fall to the ground. Then the two security guards also went weak in the knees, unable to even run. Arthur was quite strong. After all, he was a C teacher, and physically strong. He actually rushed towards me. Useless. I pulled out a gun. A stun gun. Stun gun. A prohibited item. I pulled the trigger. Arthur twitched and fell. I looked around and couldn't help but feel a little happy. The real carnival was finally about to begin. The play I had just acted out was all to lure Arthur over and make him come over secretly, thinking he was in control. The three of them were the perfect perpetrators. I could kill the Linus' whole family without any scruples, and then blame them. The ending could be a big fire. Then Elena would survive and tearfully tell the police how Arthur had taken advantage of her at school, how angry her parents were and were preparing to take action. But Arthur brought people to her house to silence them. During the fight, a fire accidentally broke out. It would be even better if I could find footage of the three of them pressing down on Elena's dad as they returned home on the outside cameras. Although there were many flaws in this story, for example, anyone could find out that Elena was not favored by her family. But the good thing was that everyone was dead. The evidence was burned to ashes. As long as we insisted on this, I believed that Elena would not be implicated too much. Everything went according to plan. The carnival began. I quickly injected a lethal dose of ether solution into the two security guards. I had no grudge against them, so letting them die peacefully was also considered my magnanimity. I would make sure that this fire would burn the bones of these people so badly that even DNA could not be tested, let alone a mere ether. Then I injected the other few people with enough ether to keep them unconscious for several hours. I dragged them into their respective rooms, a family of 3 in one room, and Arthur alone in another room. Then I tied them all to the dining chairs that had been prepared, tightly bound, with packing tape. Their bodies were tied to the back of the chair, their hands to the armrests, and their feet to the legs of the chair. Of course, their mouths were also sealed, wrapped around and around with tape. Half of their heads were wrapped in tape, binding their mouths and chins together. I probably couldn't even untee them, let alone untee them with one hand. That's right, I let that family of three each have one right hand free. This was a pied-shaped arrangement of 3 chairs. They were almost sitting in a row and facing each other. This was a necessary condition for the carnival. In order to intimidate them, I even dragged the 2 dead security guards into this room and put some parts of their bodies that I had cut off next to them. After waiting for a long time, until midnight, the family of 3 finally woke up. Of course, they were all shocked, struggling and whimpering, but it was all in vain. Dear Dad, Mom, Bon and Bonnie, don't be impatient. Tonight, let me host a warm family game, I said, happily. First of all, it is a tribute to Mom. She loves to slap people the most. So from now on, you have to slap each other in the face. Within the time of one song, you must slap until your faces are red and swollen. Understand? That's right. Their free right hand could just reach the face of the person next to them. His mother was on the right of his silly son. The silly son was on the right of his father, and his father was on the right of his mother. They were still dumbfounded, stunned. In order to advance the game as soon as possible, I kicked the head of one of the security guards over, and they were so scared that they jumped up and down. Of course they couldn't jump. If anyone's face isn't swollen enough later, I'll cut off their head. Got it? So if you love him, slap him. Otherwise you'll kill him. The more you love him, the harder you slap him. Slap him hard. I pressed the music play button. It was an English song. Amazing Grace. Let's begin. The music slowly drifted out. Please don't let me down, or someone will really die. Then I turned and left. As I closed the door, I could already hear the sound of slapping. Good. Very satisfying. The carnival had begun, and I thought everything would go smoothly. What I didn't expect was that there would be other twists and turns. I went to another room. Arthur. He had a grudge against Elena, but he had an even bigger grudge against me. Moreover, I still had to find out from him who had betrayed me. He woke up and was staring at me coldly. It was a bit of a pity that he was no longer afraid of me. With his brains, he definitely knew that he couldn't escape this disaster. So no matter how... Since he had no will to live, I could only skip this step and make him want to die. I first put him on Wavim. Mr. Arthur, this is real medicine, including antibiotics, vitamin K1, etc. If you inject it intravenously, even if you are seriously injured and bleed a lot, you will not die. His eyes widened, his mouth unable to speak because it was sealed. He also knew that something bad was going to happen. Then I took out a set of scalpels from my bag. Sharp, but small. I've studied Chinese medicine, and Chinese medicine is really good. It allows you to know which acupuncture points hurt the most, but will not kill you. Like this one. It's called Jian Yang. I stabbed it and Arthur's body trembled, but it was useless. This is Tianzong. He struggled even harder, tears streaming down his face. Zhongwan too, and of course Wenzhong, Chengzhen, Chengzhen, Huanchang Yang, Huanchang, Hyang, Hyang, Shu, San, Li, Fengqiang, Fengche. Slowly, he turned into a comical hedgehog man. Because the drug had a hemostatic effect, he would not bleed profusely if the knife was not pulled out, and he would not die. I gently patted his tearful face and said, "Also, don't you like to take off your pants? Do you know what acupuncture point is at? When you take off your pants? That place is called Wangzheng." He panicked. He struggled hard a few more times, and blinked at me desperately. But I ignored him. I stabbed him one last time, and the expression on his face was already so desperate that he wished he could die immediately. Give him a little more time, and he would beg me to kill him. I didn't say a word, turned and left, and thoughtfully closed the door for him. At that time, I didn't expect that the turning point would soon take place in this room. Since the time for a song was almost up, I had to go back and host that heartwarming family game. As soon as I pushed open the door, a pleasing scene came into view. The three of them were crying while slapping each other in the face. It was so miserable. It showed how much they loved each other, because half of everyone's faces were red and swirling like pig heads. Coupled with the melody of Amazing Grace, it was even more pleasing to the eye. It was so heartwarming, I would cherish it. Okay, you're all family. You really love each other so much. That's enough for the tribute to Mum. Stop. I walked over to their circle with a smile. A circle that Elena could never enter before, and a circle that Elena would never want to enter again. I said happily. Then the second warm little game is to pay tribute to Dad. I'm sure you all know that Dad's thing is very strong, right? His dad looked up in horror, his usual arrogance gone. At this moment he was as weak as a coward. Bonnie, the silly son, was crying. Her mother stared at me in horror, as if she didn't know that this beast had been violating Elena at home. Who cared if she knew or not? So in order to help Dad eliminate hidden dangers, I have carefully prepared these pups. Wait a minute. I took out a roll of packing tape from my backpack, took the opportunity to go around behind his dad, put the tape around his only movable hand, wrapped it around and around, and tied it to the back of the chair. Cautious as I was, I wrapped almost the entire roll of tape around it, until he couldn't struggle anymore. Then I took out a syringe from my backpack and gave his dad an injection. This injection was amazing. It was called sildenafil citrate solution. It also had a more powerful name, called Viagra. Not only was his dad staring at me, but her mother and silly son were also staring at me. They might have thought that I was going to inject him with some deadly drug. No way, how could I be so kind? Don't worry, it's not poison, because I'm going to give you this. I took out 2 hammers from my backpack and stuffed them into the hands of silly son Barney and her mother at lightning speed. As soon as I finished stuffing them, I jumped to the side for fear of being hammered. But fortunately, both mother and son were stunned, so they didn't make any move to resist. I breathed a sigh of relief and began to speak slowly. Okay, the second game is whack-a-mole. Originally, your arms might not be long enough, but with a hammer, it's just right. The mole I'm talking about, you should know what it is, right? Her mother and silly son Barney looked down at his dad's gradually bulging crotch in shock. That's right, smart, hit that place. It's also the length of one song. If I come back and don't see blood through his pants, then you will all die. Her mother and silly son Barney were stunned, while his dad was still struggling desperately. I picked up the phone on the floor and chose a new song. Yesterday Once More. This song was very appropriate. Her mother had already raised the hammer with tears in her eyes. Barney, the silly son, looked at his mother, at a loss. His dad was still whimpering, as if begging for mercy, his eyeballs almost popping out of their sockets. I turned and left, closing the door behind me. I left the good times to their family of 3. I went back to Arthur's room. He was already in excruciating pain. This wouldn't do. I hurriedly took out a syringe from my backpack and gave him an injection. It was methylphenidate hydrochloride injection, a central nervous system stimulant used to treat symptoms of sleepiness and fatigue. Controlled drug, I said to him, sincerely. Mr. Arthur, cheer up and enjoy the pain. I need you to be in pain for 24 hours before I can vent my anger. You must hold on. His eyes were full of despair, but he was indeed more energetic than before. I took out my knife and gently cut the packing tape off his mouth. And the first thing he said, when he could speak, was, "Kill me, please. Please, stop. Stop torturing me." I was quite satisfied with his reaction. He probably also knew that although it hurt, as long as the knife was not pulled out, he was still some distance away from death. I also asked the question, "Okay, then you answer me. How did you know that Principal Douglas would be assassinated that morning?" His eyes widened, and he inhaled and exhaled through his mouth, as if he didn't react for a moment. What? Stop messing around. You know what I'm asking. Answer quickly. He frowned and said, Because it was me. I killed him." Hearing this, it was my turn to frown. He was the client. Impossible. I had considered this possibility, but ultimately ruled it out. Because if he was the client, then how could there be evidence of his crime in Principal Douglas's suicide note? I pointed this out. He was even more confused and said, "No, sigh. You weren't. You didn't see the documents in his drawer, did you?" Drawer. Documents. I was confused for a moment. So from another angle, I asked another question. Then, how did you deal with the body of the killer that day? Killer. His body, no, he was still with me. He was the one just now. That man. He was saying that the person he sent to Principal Douglas's office that day was one of the security guards in the other room who had become a corpse. But there were still problems. Because I had seen that dirty cop, I could recognize his appearance. He was definitely not one of them. No, the most important question was still, he still didn't mention me, the killer. Logically speaking, this should be the most crucial information in the whole thing. I'm not talking about the killer who cleaned up the mess, but the one who actually killed Principal Douglas, and then you guys offed. Arthur was dumbfounded. His mouth was moving, but he couldn't say anything. I couldn't help but pull out a knife from his shoulder. He screamed. A few times, his face suddenly much weaker. "Hurry up and talk." He gritted his teeth and said vaguely, What do you want me to say?" "I really don't know." "What are you asking?" Where did the offing come from?" "It was me. I killed Principal Douglas. It was he who got in the way of my money. I thought it was strange." "What went wrong?" "Didn't his people report my existence to him?" "Impossible. Killing a killer on the spot was not something that the security guard could handle by himself. If he had the ability, he wouldn't be kneeling at Arthur's feet." Arthur must be lying. I kind of regretted killing the 2 security guards directly, otherwise I could have confronted them less. But the time for yesterday, once more, was almost up. I could only take out the tape and seal Arthur's mouth again, and left a sentence. "When I come back, I want to know how the killer you killed was disposed of. Otherwise he can wait to be in so much pain that you can't close your eyes for days and nights." Then I left him and quickly returned to that carnival room. I had to give him some time to think. When I pushed open the door to the happy family room, the song was very timely sung to this part. When I was young, I'd listen to the radio. I almost laughed out loud, but all 3 of them were crying. The contrast was too great. It was quite interesting. His dad was crying in pain, because his crotch was really a mess. It was all bloody. The rules of the game were met. Great. He looked desperate and didn't struggle anymore, as if he had lost consciousness from the pain. Her mother dropped the hammer and covered her face with one hand, sobbing. The tape on her face had been torn, but as I wished it was very strong and could not be torn apart. And Barney, the silly son, should be crying in fear. The hammer he threw on the ground didn't even have blood on it. It was time for the grand finale. After paying tribute to his parents, the last one to pay tribute to was this silly son. I walked over, looked at him deeply, and then pretended to be deep, saying to him, word by word, "Barney, you may not know how much they hurt me. They must die. However, you are different. You are just a little naughty. I didn't intend to kill you. So if you agree, I will let you go. Do you agree?" Barney, the silly son, nodded desperately. "That's good, but for the sake of my safety, I have to bring you in. So you must kill your parents. Can you do it?" Barney, the silly son, stopped nodding, turned to look at me, and began to tremble all over. Her mother started crying again, and even reached out her movable right hand, waving it desperately, trying to touch me. But of course I kept a safe distance. "While you have to show me some sincerity, I will also give you the time of a song, but when I come back, your parents must be dead, understand? You have a hammer, you can do it. You have to seize the opportunity. Otherwise, all three of you will die. Since you're all going to die anyway, you can survive on your own. Why not?" Seeing his hesitation, I continued to persuade him. "To be honest with you, I gave them poison, and they will definitely die later. All you have to do is hammer their heads off. With a hammer, how simple is that? You are not killing them, but helping them to be relieved before the poison takes effect." I picked up my phone and put on a song. What a wonderful world. Then I took the knife and cut the tape on the back of his chair. I was confident, because the stun gun was recharged. But I still turned and ran, because as long as he struggled a few times, he would be completely free. "Barney, I'm rooting for you. Come on." I quickly closed the door and locked it, thinking that this pair of parents would be hammered to death by their own beloved son. I suddenly forgave them. Good riddance. I was about to go back to Arthur's room. Outside, very abruptly, the doorbell rang. I looked at the time. It was already past 11 o'clock in the evening. In this remote suburb, it was too abnormal to ring the doorbell at this hour. It was very likely that this would disturb my carnival. I had to go and see who it was. I tiptoed to the entrance, looked through the peephole, and found that it was actually that silly male classmate with black-rimmed glasses. What was he doing here? I didn't even know who he was. Through the door, I whispered to him, "Get lost." He recognized my voice and quickly said, "Elena, are you okay? Your phone is turned off. You don't reply to messages and you weren't at school today. Did something happen?" "It's none of your business, get lost. I just wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible so that he wouldn't ruin my good deed." His voice also dropped. "Don't be like this, Eleanor. I'm just worried about you." Worried. I wanted to laugh. If there was really one person in the world who was worried about Elena, she wouldn't be bullied by everyone. At least she wouldn't be bullied and treated like a servant by those weaklings in her dormitory. I thought this guy was purely living in his own fantasy, fantasizing about how deeply he loved Elena. But in terms of actual actions, there was nothing. He was like the kind of person who would send a long text message to show his concern for you. He didn't put in any effort, but he acted like he loved you the most in the world. It was disgusting. It was infuriating. Yes, I was angry. To be honest, at first I just wanted to drive him away. But when he said the word worried, I suddenly wanted to play a trick on him, so I opened the door. Anyway, I had a stun gun. I said to him rudely, "You're worried about me, right? Come on in." He was taken aback and asked, subconsciously, "You're your parents, your family, are they all asleep?" "Come in." I pulled him in, closed the door, and locked it. He was still confused. "Come with me." I dropped those words and turned to leave. He hurriedly followed behind me. I took him to the door of the carnival room. There was still music playing inside, and through the door I could vaguely hear, "I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you." Of course, there was also the cry of Barney, the silly son. I said to the silly guy behind me, "You're worried about me, right? You want to help me, right? Good, open the door and go in. Go in and help me get rid of the people who are threatening me." What? He still looked puzzled. I yanked the lock open and pushed the door open hard. I originally wanted to push him into the room, but I didn't expect that Barney, the fat, silly son inside, would actually, "Oh, I'm going to kill you. Oh." He actually rushed over with a hammer in both hands. I wasn't afraid. I quickly raised a hand, holding the stun gun, but I didn't expect that things would take an unexpected turn. "Watch out." The silly guy beside me actually pushed me away, and Alina's body was really too weak. With all his strength, he pushed me so hard that I felt like I was flying. When I fell to the ground, the stun gun in my hand also slipped out, and when I looked up, I saw Barney, the silly son's hammer, smash the silly guy's head. The silly guy's face was covered in blood. Even his glasses flew off. And Barney, the silly son, must have gone completely crazy. He raised the hammer high, screaming, and continued to smash it down on the silly guy. I scrambled to get my stun gun back, stood up and yelled at Barney, the silly son, "Bastard, look here." He turned around, covered in blood. I pulled the trigger. The conductive projectile that flew out hit him steadily. The hammer fell to the ground, and he twitched and slowly collapsed to the floor. And the silly guy was lying in the corner, covered in blood, seemingly unable to even lift his head. Although I wanted to punish him at first, but now that he was dying, I couldn't be happy, because he pushed me away. Otherwise, I might have really been hurt by Barney, the silly son's hammer. Even if I pulled the trigger of the stun gun in time, I wouldn't be able to completely stop his accelerating inertia. I didn't expect Barney, the silly son, to go so crazy. With his personality, he should have been scared out of his wits. I walked over and kicked Barney, the silly son, to make sure he was completely unconscious. He shouldn't be able to get up within 10 minutes. I breathed a sigh of relief. I came to the silly guy squatted down and saw that half of his head was dented, but he was still breathing faintly. He even forced himself to turn his head so that the injured half of his face was out of my sight. He could barely open his eyelids, but his mouth was still muttering, "Elena, run. Elena. I don't need to run, you idiot." But something strange happened. Something strange happened. After scolding him, Elena's eyes actually started to cry. It was that uncontrollable state again. It was that uncontrollable state again. Through my blurry vision, I realized. It turned out that this silly guy, he was disabled. His right hand, because he reached out to block the hammer, was broken. It was a prosthesis. He kicked his legs randomly after he fell, and one of his shoes flew off, and his right foot was also a prosthesis. His right hand and right foot were amputated. It should be a car accident, or other accident, which happened to hurt his right side. He was a very disabled person. No wonder, in PE class, he didn't even have to line up. I had wronged him. Maybe it wasn't that he didn't want to help Elena, but that he really couldn't. I also understood why he came to ring the doorbell so late. It was only possible to get to town by public transport after school from St. Mary's Vocational High School. He didn't ride a bicycle. He should have walked here. Not only silly, but also a little stupid. Wrong. He was still worried about others in his dying moments. He was really stupid. He didn't even know what was going on in this house. If he had used his brain, he would have known that I would not be in any danger at all. Elena's eyes kept shedding tears. She couldn't stop them. It was a pity that I didn't even know his name. But in my mind, some images began to appear. Strangely enough, I had absolutely no memory of Elena. But at this time, it was as if Elena had specially transmitted some memories over. There was an image of her walking with him on the playground. There was an image of them meeting in the cafeteria. There was an image of them chatting softly. At that moment, I understood. Elena, she liked him too. However, she couldn't like anyone because she was a dirty slut. And he was also a self-abased and sensitive disabled boy who even had problems taking care of himself. They were really a match made in heaven. Ah ha 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 ha. Elena's eyes were still streaming with tears, but I still laughed out loud. I didn't know what I was laughing at. Just then, the silly guy spoke again. Elena, I ask you one thing. I was even a little angry and shouted at him. I said, I don't need to run.
No.
He actually smiled. It should be a return of consciousness before death. Can you hug me? I called. I froze. And in my mind, a voice that sounded like Elena's also appeared. Hug him. He's been waiting for more than 2 years. Elena burst into tears again. I hugged him. His body was really cold, along with the last sound of music from the room. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Elena started crying uncontrollably. This might be the only person in the world who truly cared about Elena. But he was dead. To hell with the wonderful world. I stood up and wiped the tears from my face with my sleeve. There was an unknown fire burning in my chest. I turned around and dragged Bonnie, the silly son's fat body, into the room. Closed the door. He wasn't dead yet. I didn't want him to die so soon. And this time there was no need for music. I kept busy until 3 o'clock in the morning before Barney, the silly son, finally died. Anger made me even forget my own business. Forget about Arthur. I was filthy and lost. When I returned to Arthur's room, he was really dying, but fortunately, the Roman 4 bottle I gave him was large and sufficient. I tore off the sticker from his mouth. Exhausted, I threw down a sentence. Just tell me, I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, I can't play with you till dawn. You lunatic. Say something useful. I didn't have the energy to continue messing with him. Arthur also suddenly laughed, as if there was a return of consciousness before death. He said, there was no other killer in Principal Douglas's office that day. You're crazy. You must have been scared crazy. That's why you suddenly became a different person. Ha 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 ha. You didn't even realize you were a lunatic yourself. I was tired and said to him listlessly, You still have the energy to talk nonsense. When my man went to Principal Douglas's office, you were knocked unconscious. Principal Douglas did it because you wanted to steal his documents. You don't remember. I checked later. That day, Principal Douglas didn't call you to the office at all, and didn't violate you. He just wanted to turn over, to steal something. I didn't expect you would beat me crazy, and even made up such a terrifying thing. It's fate. What was going on? I suddenly felt that Arthur, he was not lying. Because he had no reason to lie anymore. Combined with his reaction, when I first interrogated him, he had been insisting on one thing from the beginning to the end. That day, he sent someone to tell Principal Douglas and make it look like a suicide by hanging. In his mind, there was no other killer. We welcomed you aboard high-speed raw EU trains. However, he also agreed that I was not Elena, and what he said was made up such a terrifying thing. So he meant I was a personality derived from Elena after she went crazy to save herself. At this time, I suddenly remembered a sentence I said to Elena. Do your own thing. Could it be that I had already hinted to myself? Do your own thing. It meant I wasn't helping Elena. I was Elena. And that me, the killer me, was actually all made up by me. I suddenly remembered that after I was trapped in Elena's body, I lost some memories of being a killer. Maybe it wasn't lost, but it never existed. At that moment, I seemed to see Elena, in order to escape, earning the midnight oil to study. Not studying, but researching all sorts of strange things. For example, methods of killing, methods of disposing of corpses, and the criminal law violated by doing those things. It turned out that the killer me actually did not exist. The encounter in Principal Douglas's office actually did not exist. The dirty cop who killed me also did not exist. Nothing existed. Until Arthur died, he was laughing, as if mocking me. And until the end, I didn't set fire to the place. Because I was very confused. Because if I was Elena, then this kind of life, I'd rather not have it. I'd rather die. Elena was already 18 years old. Because she went to night school, I could finally be sentenced to death. That's what the law stipulated you could kill, as long as you could bear the punishment of a life for a life. Elena said, it will. And I was willing to bear it. But later, things changed again. After the police intervened, the case in this house and the case of Principal Douglas' murder were combined. I confessed everything. My identity as a killer, being possessed by Elena's body after death, and all the killings in this house. After that, I was detained in the detention center for 8 months. During this period, I only saw my lawyer, Daniel. He told me that the police had found Arthur's other accomplices, and they had also confessed. Principal Douglas was indeed killed by someone Arthur hired. In fact, there was no killer me, as I had described. The truth was exactly what Arthur said. Elena was knocked unconscious because she wanted to steal Principal Douglas's documents. And the person sent by Arthur was the security guard I killed. He was only there to collect the body and set up the scene. That day, Principal Douglas was poisoned by Arthur in the meeting room before returning to his office. He would have died in the principal's office sooner or later. No one needed to kill him. The person sent by Arthur only made him look like he had hanged himself and left a suicide note. The suicide note did not mention anything about Arthur. The contents of Arthur's crimes were all seen by Elena when she stole documents in Principal Douglas's office. This was the truth. Then there were constant trials. Because the case was complex, the whole process was not open to the public. But my lawyer Daniel told me that I would be fine. Because after multiple forensic examinations, I was diagnosed with severe dissociative identity disorder. I was a mentally ill person with no criminal responsibility. I could even be acquitted. But I didn't care much anymore. Maybe death was the best outcome. Because I didn't know what the meaning of living was. But at the same time, I felt strange. Where did Elena go? Was she okay? If this was really just dissociative identity disorder, and the killer me never existed, then Elena, as the owner of the body, could completely take back the body. Because everything was over. 8 months, such a long time, she never appeared again. At the end of the last trial, the judge announced my sentence. Exemption from criminal punishment. But I would be locked up in a designated mental hospital until the doctors determined that I was cured. As I was being taken away, I suddenly saw a familiar face. This was a closed trial. Only the parties, witnesses, and defense lawyers could be present. But that face was not any of the above. Then it could only be judicial personnel. That's right. That face was the dirty cop who shot me in the head. When I looked at him, he avoided my gaze. I repeatedly confirmed that I was not mistaken. Then I smiled. I hadn't smiled much in the past 8 months. This time, I finally smiled from the heart. I was extremely happy. I finally knew why Elena hadn't appeared yet. Because she said she would repay me. And now I had just done what she should have done. But I hadn't finished what I should have done yet. This was the best reward she wanted to give me. When everything was over, she would come back and take back her body. And I would be satisfied to return to heaven. Until then, everything would be fine.